Live from Beit Shemesh and broadcasted around the world, you are listening to the From Entrepreneur Podcast with your host, Nahum Kligman. Interviews and advice from Jewish entrepreneurs from around the world. Listen, learn, be Matzliach.
Welcome to episode 18 of the From Entrepreneur. And today I didn't introduce you yet.
Episode Kaye.
Oh, episode Kaye. That's funny.
That's right.
I am sitting here with not just a very creative and very different type of entrepreneur, but also a friend of mine, Saul Kaye. We're going to go into lots of great stuff that he's involved in. I met Saul through a mutual friend, Uri Schechterman, who is the CEO of Nace Mobile. And I'm a small partner in a boutique wine store in Beit Shemesh that Saul and Uri head up. And that's how I got to know Saul. But he is, one of the things I know we've talked about in past episodes is really fearless to be a successful entrepreneur. And Saul, personifies that, going out into different markets, opening up bank accounts in different companies in different countries to, do his work. He's a pharmacist. He's an investor. And today we're going to talk about all that stuff, but we're going to also focus on cannabis, which has become a huge, I wouldn't say issue, what would be a huge industry, hot topic, there we go, in all over the world, especially in the medical world. And without further ado, I want to introduce my buddy, my friend. Oh, and of course, we got to talk about subs. Saul, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
We're actually sitting in Subs right now. Why don't you tell us what Subs is and how it got started, and just a quick overview about Subs since we're here.
Sure. Subs is the first co-working space in Beit Shemesh. We set ourselves a target to build the ecosystem in Beit Shemesh, to build entrepreneurship, to make Beit Shemesh a home for high-tech, to keep people in Beit Shemesh, stop them traveling outside of Beit Shemesh. There is no reason. If people work in Beit Shemesh, they spend in Beit Shemesh. It is good for your community. And the world is moving towards co-working. If you don't know what co-working it is, it's a model that sort of exploded, I guess, 9 months ago with WeWork, who are the biggest. They have a $10 billion valuation. 20,000 times revenue. So talk about a bubble. But what they've said is the same as people no longer have a career. You have a job and you move from job to job to job. And that is your career rather than working for 30 years for Chevrat Chashmal, the electric company. You can move around, and that's part of how we work today. And part of that working is co-working, where you can work in an environment with other entrepreneurs, with other people, service providers. You provide them a service, they provide you a service. Everyone wins.
So it's a great, first of all, I'm going to post some pictures of this place because when you're here, you don't feel like you're in Beit Shemesh. I've said this 100 times to people already that you feel like you're actually in Silicon Valley. It's such a gorgeous place. I mean, and you did it in like record time. It was like insane. It went from a shell, 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
You can't believe it's like insane. People are not going to believe it. I'm going to post some pictures. You guys got to check it out on the website. But SUBS actually stands for Startup Beit Shemesh. Clifton Flack, he's a partner here with you guys.
He's a partner. He's our community manager.
He's fantastic. He does a fantastic job. And more than just than having workspace for people to come to, there's also excellent programs, speakers. Tonight we had 6 VCs here in Israel that came and spoke and answered questions, and really a phenomenal event. And first of all, so kudos to you and to your team and for everybody involved because, it is very needed and you guys did a fantastic job here.
Thank you very much.
So I want to dig into we have a lot to talk about, but I want to dig in first to a little bit about your background, where you're from. You obviously have a little bit of an accent going on. So where did you grow up? And I know how'd you get into pharmacy? Were you always an entrepreneur? How'd you get to Israel? And all that other good stuff.
Sure. I am from Perth, Australia, the western side, small Jewish community, 10,000 Jews now. When I grew up, it was probably 6,000, very small frum community. And we grew up there. I left Perth and went to Sydney to finish my studies. At that stage, I was studying pharmacy. Before that, I was studying to be a vet and didn't enjoy that. So I looked for something else in the medical field, knowing that I didn't want to be a vet. I definitely didn't want to be a doctor. My parents would have liked me to be a doctor. So I chose pharmacy, and my father said, you're going to be a glorified salesman, which is what a pharmacist is in his eyes. And I always looked at it as something a little different, looked at the opportunity inside. and been in pharmacy, in retail pharmacy for 20 years in Israel.
So were you an actual pharmacist in Australia?
Yeah, I'm Australian trained, Israeli licensed, and I've looked at various different ways to make pharmacy work. Pharmacy as a business is a very, very difficult business. Retail in general is a very difficult business. Pharmacy is an extremely difficult business. The big players squeeze the independents. The demographics continually change inside, especially in a regulated market like Australia and Israel. It is very hard to make money from prescription medications. You need a lot of volume, and a lot of volume means a lot of staff and a bigger facility and all the rest of the things that come along with running a big retail operation. So I went looking for different models that could work together with a retail space. And I fell into online pharmacy probably 6 years ago, where the Canadian pharmacies were dispensing because the Canadian drugs were cheaper, and Americans actually cross the border to go and buy medications in Canada, and they do it in Mexico, and it's a common thing in America.
Because they couldn't get prescriptions in America, or because it's just cheaper?
It's cheaper.
Is that much cheaper that it's worth crossing the border?
If you live, for example, up in Washington, so it's a quick drive up to Canada to buy prescriptions, or you live down somewhere in the Mexican border, you hop over, it's less regulated, it's cheaper, you can get things without a prescription. So the American community got used to that, and it started as a very much mail order business. And we started dispensing for some of the big Canadian online pharmacies, and I quickly realized there's no reason why we can't build our own brand, and I did. And that is how Israel Pharmacies was born. And through that, we became involved internationally on a global scale of manufacture, pipelining out of various dispensaries in other countries, because Israel has a specific model that works for some drugs. Australia, New Zealand, India, Turkey, Georgia all have different models, and different molecules are better from different places. So I used multiple dispensaries in many, many countries in order to service my customer base, which is in the US.
Wow. So that's a huge undertaking. And so it's still going strong now, or have you noticed a shift?
We've always grown 25% a year. We don't like to stick our head too high up above the waters, because Misrad Abriut, the big shark, will come and chop my head off. So
right. They're big listeners of the show, by the way.
Right. We like to grow at a nice steady rate. Customer service is of premium importance. It's the way that we've grown. We take care of our customers. We have very, very good customer retention and customer loyalty. And those are key to what made that a success, especially because it's a type of business where I have a lot of limitations, both on the financial side, because it is pharma, and on the regulatory side, because it is pharma. So I can't do AdWords on Google. I can't pay for advertising. I have to build my customer base through loyalty.
Word of mouth, I guess.
Word of mouth, classic advertising, and all these type of things, and content. And we've built our own social marketing method in order to get around the limitations set by Google.
So it's funny. I mean, you're talking about you have a pharmacy degree, you're a pharmacist, but really what you're describing, you're more of an entrepreneur that happens to be a pharmacist, and a pharmacist that got into being an entrepreneur. Do you call yourself an entrepreneur? Have you always felt like you were in more of a business person, but you had interest in pharmacy, or is this just something that came along?
I think I'm a pharma entrepreneur. I mean, I've been an entrepreneur for years. I started, I guess, my first business when I was 12 with another very successful friend of mine. We used to clean gutters together. I've always looked at a situation and seen something that's missing or something that could be done differently. And over the years now, thank God, I can afford to make those changes myself. But over the years, I would try and squeeze together an investment to make a difference in a space that I saw an opportunity.
Excellent, excellent. So I want to spend a lot of time on cannabis, specifically medical cannabis, and then the business aspects of cannabis, because this is an entrepreneurial show and it is a business show, and I know you're definitely at the forefront of the business aspects of cannabis, and I think it's a important industry to talk about. But I first want to, a lot of my listeners, they hear cannabis, they hear marijuana, they think it's illegal, it's usser, it's but medical cannabis has a long history. I want to talk about a little bit about how big pharma, how they came into play, and how they've been holding back cannabis. But I just want to first say why I personally am a advocate for medical cannabis, especially in Israel. Well, first of all, it was a big week this week in Israel where they announced that they are now going to allow doctors to prescribe cannabis just like any other narcotic, and you'll be able to pick it up at local pharmacies. And then also specifically to my case, for kids that have epilepsy, they'll now be able to have their cannabis subsidized from the government, or from the Kupot, I should say. So I have a special needs son, name is Moishi, and he's been having seizures. He has cerebral palsy and microcephaly, and he's been having seizures for the last several years. And we were putting him on all sorts of different medications and running from doctor to doctor, suggesting put him on this medication, put him on that medication. And the medications were horrible, they were disgusting, and there were tremendous side effects. And they weren't really stopping the seizures. And even if they were stopping the seizures, they were causing other problems. And this went on for a few years. And it wasn't until we put him on a new medication that put him in a coma for 2 days, where we said, that's it, enough with this garbage. And I came across something which I know you're familiar with called Charlotte's Web. I'm going to link to the video on this podcast episode because I think it's important to watch this story about Charlotte's Web. But basically, Charlotte's Web is named after a young girl named Charlotte. What was she, 2 years old, 3 years old?
Charlotte Figge. She was a couple of years old when this story went down.
Right. She was having seizures, hundreds of seizures a day.
She has a condition called Dravet syndrome, which is a very specific case of epilepsy with hundreds of micro seizures a day. She wasn't gaining weight. She wasn't growing neurologically. She was stagnant. She, therefore, was more special needs than she needed to have been. And I believe she was on 20-plus pharmaceutical preparations in order to control the 300 microseizures, which it didn't do. And some of those, like you said, have serious side effects and huge addiction profiles. And luckily, the regulatory environment allowed that they could do some studies and try and find the right strain in order to minimize the number of seizures or microseizures that Charlotte was having. And a famous doctor now, Dr. Shackelford in Colorado, together with the Steele brothers, who went and grew a specific strain which happens to be high in a compound called CBD, one of the active compounds inside the marijuana plant. They developed a high CBD strain which, upon the first dose, stopped her seizures miraculously. And she's now, I think, 11, running around.
Wow.
Fantastic, cognitively much better, and amazing.
Well, this was a story that was heard around the world, especially for parents of special needs kids or kids with epilepsy, because when I watched it for the first time, I sort of said, this can't be cannabis. Marijuana is going to, help my son with his seizures. But I started looking up more and I started studying it more, and more people were trying out cannabis for their kids with epilepsy, and with incredible results. And I spoke to my Rav and I asked him about it. He said, there's nothing wrong with it like any other medication. I mean, you're taking it, first of all, it's really for his own, good. It's for his benefits. Mamash, like a case of pekuach nefesh, if you could help somebody, not have the seizures. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with it from a medical perspective. And so I'll never forget
There's nothing actually wrong with a halachic perspective either, actually. A little bit of history behind. The modern day halacha is influenced by the last 100 years of political genocide that they tried against the marijuana plant. And before that, it was commonly accepted as a general treatment of many, many ailments. There is anecdotal evidence inside the Gemara, inside Mikra, of cannabis use. It was certainly known in other social circles around then. The Sumerians, the Egyptians, the American Indians all have used cannabis for thousands of years, and it was commonly prescribed up till 1931 inside USA.
So what happened in 1931, and then we'll get back to my story.
Right. Well, let's go back to your story, and then I'll give a little bit background history on
that'd
cannabis.
Be fantastic. So basically, when we realized we're not going to give him any more of this garbage medication that the doctors they themselves don't know what they're just prescribing this, prescribing that, try this, try that. And my son is not a guinea pig. And so we imported from Colorado cannabis. I'll call it cannabis.
Illegally.
You're not supposed to tell them that.
So afterwards, I'll tell a nice little story about how America got their first stock of THC.
Okay.
Illegally.
So, okay. So, I wasn't looking at a legal, I was looking at, this is what my kid needs. I don't care. I'll do anything for my children as long as, it's within the boundaries of halacha. And so we ordered it, and my son who had an operation a couple years before this. He had lost a lot of his cognitiveness. He used to say a lot more words. We think something happened. We think he had seizures underneath anesthesia when he was going through this muscle lengthening surgery. And he lost a lot of what he was capable of doing. The first week that we gave him cannabis, we saw him do things and say things that we hadn't seen in 3 years. And it was a nace, and it was a huge shock to us. My family, my wife, we saw Moishi start to try to walk again. We saw him use his hand and play with toys, which he hadn't done for 3 years. This is the first week, and his seizures went totally gone. From having 3 to 4 seizures a day, he went to 0 seizures. And we saw in that first week the real potential in medical cannabis, and we became huge believers. And wow, this gift that's mamish came from Hashem. Obviously, it's a plant that's a natural plant that Hashem put in this world, and the effects it's had on our son was just truly miraculous. Now, after that first week, we've been playing over the last year or so, a year and a half, with different dosages and different things. His body sort of got used to it, but we saw that with medical cannabis, that there is potential for him that we hadn't seen in any other medication. After, importing for about 6 months or so, we got an official license here in Israel. So now we are legal, and, the miracles continue to happen. The seizures continue to go down. We're still, experimenting with different mixtures between CBD and THC, and, how much to give him and stuff like that. But I'm part of a network of over 80 families that give their kids cannabis for epilepsy. And every single one of them have seen differences. Obviously, there's still challenges, but by far it is safer. I don't know if healthier is the word, but it's safer. There's no side effects, and it's worked better than anything else we have ever given him, and that's across the board. All right, so I'm going to hand it back over to you, Saul, just to
go a little bit more. I'll give a little wrap-up of the remarkable cannabis plant that Hashem gave us. Cannabis has been known as cannabis indica, cannabis sativa for many, many years, thousands of years. It has been used in traditional Chinese medicine. It has been used as a medicine in the Mediterranean for thousands of years. The reason in 1930s that cannabis became a taboo was largely together with prohibition. When prohibition came in America, it came in on all mind-altering medications, including cocaine, morphine, opium, alcohol.
Cocaine was an ingredient in Coca-Cola originally.
Correct. And it became the black man's drug, the Negro's drug. It was a South American drug. The marijuana, the word marijuana is Spanish. We call it cannabis, which is the Latin name. But we lost the use and the study of this plant for 100 years, when we've known how to isolate substances for many years. In 1921, we isolated insulin and started mass producing it. We know how to do this for hundreds of years already, but because of the political situation surrounding marijuana and marijuana madness and all the crazy things that it can cause, like paranoia, we have been forced to not study this plant, other than in one country, and that country is Israel. In 1960, there was a researcher in Hebrew University, Dr. Raphael Meshulam, who went to the police and said, I want to study it. And they said, sure. Because why not? It's Israel, so you can do anything.
And it was the 60s.
And it was the 60s. And he studied it. He isolated the psychoactive compound, THC, and subsequently another 12 compounds, which are collectively called cannabinoids. And following on from that for the next 40 years, understood how those molecules react with our body. And the interesting thing with how it reacts with our body, normally when you have a compound which works, it works on a receptor. So he found there are 2 receptors, the CB1 and the CB2 receptors, that have receptors in every single organ in our body. Now, he came up with a system which he calls the endocannabinoid system. This is the cannabinoids, the cannabis that your body naturally produces. And it does. And it affects every single system in your body. Now, if you're looking to educate yourself about it, there's a new video, a documentary about Meshulam. It's called Meshulam the Scientist. Nachum will link to it on the podcast as well. It's a very interesting, lovely story about Raphael Meshulam, who's now 84 years old, and how he discovered THC. how we isolated THC, and how the American government took 10 grams of isolated THC back on a plane into America in order to study it. Completely illegal.
Wow.
Right? And that was the only THC that the American government has ever tested on, isolated in the Hebrew in Jerusalem.
Interesting.
So, great story. He's a lovely man. He's the grandfather of cannabis. Israel has 23,000 patients currently in its medical marijuana program. The interesting thing with that is, you say it's 23,000
23,000 meaning 23,000 licensed.
Correct. So now that's not a lot. Let's be honest. California has, 3 million patients. Right. But our 23,000 patients in Israel have recorded medical history using cannabis. The 3 million, the 10 million, the 20 million people who use it anecdotally around the rest of the world have no clinical data that can be used and understood. So that is why Israel has been at the forefront of cannabis research. We have a regulatory system which said in the 60s you can study the plant. We've had a medical marijuana program since 1974. When the first patients got it.
Oh, wow.
And they were the first growers. They were allowed to grow their own medicine, which is where...
What were they using it for back in 74? Like, what was the main...
I don't know the original... one of the first patients was Crohn's, actually. Mm-hmm. He was a chayal, an army soldier, and he lost something like 35 kilos in 3 months in his training, and he ended up being hospitalized, and nothing worked, and he said, give me cannabis, and they did, and it worked, and he's now alive and well.
So just interject a second. Why don't you tell us about more of the applications of cannabis? We talked about for epilepsy, we talked about now for Crohn's. What other diseases or sicknesses do people have that can benefit from cannabis? So
number one, top and foremost, nausea and weight loss and all the bad side effects from oncology medication. If you have cancer, the only way to kill cancer is to kill every cell in your body and hope that you kill the cancer quicker than you kill your own cell. That wreaks absolute havoc on your body, as you can imagine. And if anyone has a family member or a friend with cancer, you know the pain and suffering they go through with chemotherapy. And this is a treatment in order to make them better. But on the way, it makes them so much worse. So first and foremost, oncology. Secondly, anorexia, which nothing has ever been able to treat it before. It seemed to be a psychological problem. It may not be a psychological problem. It's used for Parkinson's, ALS, who knows what epilepsy on the neurological side, but who knows what else it could be used for because we haven't been allowed to study the plant. It's used for gastro problems like Crohn's, diverticulitis, I think in the future, irritable bowel syndrome, and pain management.
Pain management,
which is everyone in the world suffers from pain at some time. And the drugs that are on offer today are all narcotics. They all have huge addiction profiles. They make you drowsy. They make you constipated. They're not cheap. They wreak havoc on other parts of your body. And I would say every listener out there thinks that that's okay.
And there's a myth that cannabis is addictive.
Correct.
It's a myth.
It is a myth. There was a study done on the toxicity of cannabis where they reached somewhere around 2,500 pounds of cannabis consumed in a very short time, and nothing happened.
Wow.
Now, take Tylenol, Acamol, paracetamol, commonly prescribed over-the-counter medication, and you swallow 8 of those tablets, and you will need a liver transplant. Wow. So, again, history, politics said that this is an illegal plant, a plant you shouldn't be using. It has all of those bad side effects. It causes people to use harder drugs. That has been an argument that they've used for 100 years. Right, it's a gateway drug,
right.
Which has been completely disproven. It causes paranoia. Yes, of course it causes paranoia because you're looking over your shoulder to see if a policeman's over there. So is it the cannabis or is it the police that cause paranoia? All of these things are being debunked. And you say, well, you can't drive under the influence of cannabis. And I can tell you 100% you can drive under the influence of cannabis. It increases your motor agility. It increases your alpha waves. It has use in ADD, ADHD in the future.
Much better than Ritalin, I would say. I mean, that's a whole other
better
topic.
than amphetamine, which is speed,
right.
and it's speeding your body up. Cannabis is slowing down. Everyone's happy. Everyone's calm. Let's use it as a peace tool. Let's drop it all over the world and get everyone happy.
So just to let's talk a little bit about Big Pharma, because, you said 1931 it was banned with alcohol, but then alcohol was legalized, I guess when Prohibition was over. When was that? In 50s?
50s. Yeah.
And, but cannabis yet wasn't. So why is that? Why does Big Pharma, what do they have to lose by allowing medical cannabis to come into the world?
It's very easy. Take your son's example. He was on how many medications before cannabis?
I think 5 different ones.
And how much did that cost you a month?
Hundreds and hundreds of shekels, but
how much did it cost the kupa every month?
A lot more than that, thousands.
Okay. And now how many medications is he on?
1.
What is that?
Cannabis.
Is that a medication?
Well, it's a plant. It's a natural.
Okay,
I don't even know if
that's a different argument. That's a different argument. But okay, let's say he's on one medication against 22 others. Now, those 22 generate how many billions of dollars for pharmaceutical companies? A lot. And can you grow your own cannabis in your backyard and continue to have your own medicine? And
legally or physically?
Let's call it in a perfect world. You find a strain, it works. You get the genetics for it, and you grow it.
Right.
You continue to take a clone of the mother plant and continue to grow new plants every day. What does that cost you?
Nothing.
A bit of sunshine and a bit of water.
Right.
Now, that's the big problem with Big Pharma.
So I've heard, up to that the Big Pharma would tend to lose 40% of the market if cannabis was legalized medically.
I would say it's more than that, because if you've seen...
More than 40%.
Well, if you've seen children and adults who are taking 22 compounds every single day, and those are reduced, I would say it's going to wipe out maybe 99% of their revenues.
That's insane.
You can now treat pain by yourself. You can treat neurological issues. You can treat stomach issues. You're happier. So now you don't need your antidepressants, and you're no longer in pain. You don't need your painkillers. So 99% of your drugs are gone.
How big is Big Pharma, just to put a number on what we're talking about here?
Trillions of dollars.
Trillions of dollars around the world. And so there are people that have a vested interest in spreading false rumors about cannabis, right, and holding it back from a political level. I would assume that big money is spent with the politicians trying to delegalize and not allow it to be legal. But the tide is changing. I mean, you have several.
I believe
states
we are moving towards a tipping point. I don't think we're there yet. The eventuality will be legalization internationally, in my opinion. It will take some time, but the tide has to change. It's becoming a topic. Everyone is talking about it. Election people are talking about it. It is a topic spoken about the upcoming election in America. It's certainly a topic in Israel since 6 months ago, where it was a minor topic, and now it's a major topic.
Right.
The police have mentioned that they're going to relook at how they look at cannabis. Misrad Abriut, the Ministry of Health, are looking at how to increase patient access.
That's Rav Litzman. Right?
That is Litzman's program, which is not the most ideal program. We suggested a different program to the ministry, and they rejected it.
Okay.
Unfortunately, people in government are still people in government and choose to do things their way, even though they might listen and learn a better way to.
Well, listen, we're at the forefront here. I mean, and
correct. I feel it's very much at this stage. If you take a step forward, it's good. I just think that some of the ways that the government goes about it is you take 2 steps forward and 5 steps back, and that's currently what's happening. However, we're talking about an fast developing, call it bubble, because it will be a bubble, and I'll tell you how fast it is. I've been in this space for about 2 years. In the last 6 months, we've gone from completely illegitimate to talk about it to everybody talking about it. Right. And the power of social media, the power of the influence that people will have over this is there will be a tipping point.
Now, I just want to clarify also that when we talk about cannabis, most people think it's about smoking a joint, smoking a marijuana cigarette, but we're talking about in edibles. We're talking about food. I know that Rabbi Moshe Elephant from the OU is looking into giving a hechsher. He's worked with a grower for the time when you're going to need kosher medical cannabis products. So I think and you could inhale it as well.
Correct. The movement in America is eat to treat, where the effect of cannabis in the stomach because of the to a receptor is much longer. If you smoke it, the effect is immediate, which is why it's typically been smoked. But the edible effect lasts for 6 hours as opposed to an hour and a half.
Oh, wow.
And it's much easier to dose. Now we can talk about cannabis as a medicine. Whereas if you're talking about cannabis smoked, it's not a medicine. You can't go to a doctor and the doctor will say, smoke this and come back in the morning and tell me how it was.
Well, isn't that what they do for pain management? Or
again, because the profile for pain is you need the immediate response and relief, then smoking is still the best way to go about it. However, there's a movement now to vape. Vaping is a process. The cannabis plant actually has to go through a chemical process in order to activate itself. That process is called decarboxylation. How we've typically done it for thousands of years is you light your cannabis up, you put fire to it, it goes through that chemical process called decarboxylation, and you get active THC. So we have learned for thousands of years to smoke it. You can vaporize the THC at 191 degrees Celsius, and all you get is THC. And higher temperatures, 201, 202, 203 degrees, you can extract your CBDs. So there is a movement in America to eat to treat. There is a definite movement to vape. And there will be eventually tablets, patches, creams, sprays, nasal sprays, everything, every other delivery method that we have for medication can be applied to the cannabis.
Yeah, actually, I read an amazing story. You probably heard of it also. I'm not sure when it was, but there was some doctor who was really anti-cannabis, and his wife came up with some sort of sickness, and he rubbed like a cannabis cream. Was this a cancer thing? Do you know what story I'm talking about?
I don't know.
It was some sort of cannabis cream or something, and it actually, entered through the skin and healed her.
Right.
But I mean, more and more of these stories are coming out now because this is, a business podcast, and really, I want to talk about Cannatech. I want to talk about, you have an upcoming conference, I think the first of its kind, the business of cannabis. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what is Cannatech? Tell us about the upcoming conference, and what are the opportunities for investors and people who want to make money in cannabis today?
Sure. So after 2 years of research and looking at what cannabis businesses I want to invest in and how I want to invest in the space, one of the holes we saw was a lack of a platform and a community platform between the entrepreneurs, the VCs, the investors, the angels. And similar to what I did here in Subs, where I'm building a ecosystem ground up in Beit Shemesh for entrepreneurs, we feel there's the same opportunity exists in the cannabis space. And the major players in the world are coming to Cannatech. Cannatech will be in Tel Aviv on December 7th. We have Rafi Meshulam, the famous THC scientist.
Who you spoke about before. He's coming.
He's our chairman. We have a doctor in America who has 22,000 patients herself, and she has prescribed to them. So she has more weight than the cannabis unit at the Ministry of Health.
Wow.
Right? So let's start a dialogue. We're bringing, hopefully, the Ministry of Health will agree to come to this event. The police, the regulators, the investors. We have commitments from very large VCs, very standard industry, slow adapters as VCs are coming because they know the scope of this space and how big it can be. They're starting to be interested in the space, and there is.
I mean, you're talking about if we're talking about eventually taking over 99% of big pharma, you're talking about $1 trillion industry.
And outside of that, you're talking about the whole recreational side. You're talking about the culture side. You're talking about the apps that can be developed, the technologies, the medical devices. There are so many. Every opportunity you can think of that has existed in the last 20 years in investment. So start with finance. It exists. Start with grow tech, how to grow better, consistent strains. Right? Israel has been growing in a desert for 60 years. So we know how to grow in a desert. We'll be able to grow cannabis in a desert. So there's agrotech, there's water tech, how to make your grow cleaner, how to not use regular fertilizers. Again, if this is a medicine that you want to treat people with, you want it to be as natural as possible.
And bodake, we got to keep it, bug-free.
That's right. No bugs and no fungus, because fungus and wet grows ruin your crop. And how to keep consistent, standardized crops, because if a child gets his medicine and that is the strain that works, and there are 1,700 known strains right now, and probably more, but if you know that this one strain, call it XXY, is the one that works for your kid, that is the one you want to get. And you will do anything to get that. And it has to be standard and it has to be good each and every time. And the opportunity exists across the board. So if you take any space that I've been involved in, whether it's e-commerce, there are certainly e-commerce plays here in cannabis. People will be selling vaporizer pens, extracts, patches, pills, grinders,
You're talking about when it becomes
papers.
legal, or
Even now it's happening. You've got legal states in America. There are 4 legal states, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, and Alaska, all legal for cannabis, right, across the board, both medically and recreationally. And you've got a medical marijuana program in 23 other states. That's more than 50% of Americans have access to legal marijuana. So take any space, take an app. You've got a big app called Weed Maps, which is going to take on Waze. It's how do I get my strain delivered to me in California within 40 minutes. You've got big social networks coming up like Massroots. So we've got now a Facebook or a LinkedIn play. You've got doctors, clinics, testing facilities, grow facilities, technology on how to grow tech, agro-tech, every single space that you can think of. Where have I been? If I'm a software guy, there is a software play. It is that broad. It is that opportunistic right now. You talk about the gold rush in America, and people rush from all over the world to America for the gold rush. This is the green rush.
It's funny. I mean, I guess when you're looking at it like that, there really is tremendous opportunities for an entrepreneur to find his niche, to find his space. I guess, there's a website, Canatech.
Canna-tech.co.
Okay. We'll link to it in the show notes.
Great, thank you.
And you're building a forum, you're building a place for people to
communicate. We're building a platform, a
learn.
global platform that we can take to every emerging country. We know that Europe is going to be bigger than the United States in the long run. Germany, Czech Republic, already looking at legalization. They're talking in Italy, legalization in under 3 months. The UK, there was just a petition over the weekend. 100,000 people signed a petition. By UK law, it now has to be discussed in Parliament.
Wow.
The tipping point is very, very close to legalization across the board. And you mentioned Mr. Abud making these steps forward and allowing patients to get access through pharmacies, and that's all great. I think by the time they figure out how to implement that system, it might be legal in Israel. That's how fast this space is moving.
Wow. And I think actually a big play will be in home growing. Just like you could brew your own beer and
make your own wine. You're brewing your own beer, and now you're actually making your own medicine.
Right.
You're growing your own medicine.
Which is incredible in terms of being able to save the money and to have access when you need it. And of course, I'm this being a From podcast, I know there's going to be a lot of upcoming discussions on cannabis over the coming years. Especially, I don't want to talk about it too much now. On the recreational side of things, what's the difference between having a l'chaim and or having some a brownie, with cannabis in it? But that's way above my pay level.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because you're still making the connection and assumption based on 100 years of propaganda that smoking weed or consuming cannabis is like drinking alcohol. Now, that's because you've been told for 100 years it makes you high. Is your son high?
Originally, what we were giving him, he was 50% CBD, 50% THC, and he was stoned to an extent, but he was never happier. He would laugh and be happy.
He's happy. He's functioning.
And who would want,
right.
We all want our kids to be happy. And,
now, we associate tobacco and alcohol with...
But funny, but the Rabbanim have been ossuring tobacco, have been ossuring smoking. They're obviously against recreational drinking. Obviously for Kiddush and for mitzvahs, obviously there's a point and a purpose. And even at a simcha, having a l'chaim, I think it's going to be a long time before Gedolim will come out and say, if they ever will come out and say that, hey, it's okay to take a hit or to take, eat a kosher cannabis brownie. I don't see that happening anytime real soon, just because of the stigma and because,
So I believe differently. I think that it won't be a halachic issue. There will be kosher edibles. There will be people, they've already said all cannabis grows obviously are kosher. It didn't need to be said. It was said. The issur exists, in my opinion, because of the association with alcohol.
No, but I don't know. It's because you're altering your mind. So why is it permitted to alter your mind?
It's always been permitted to alter our mind.
Halachically?
Halachically.
So it's an interesting discussion about whether it be permissible at times or anything. Like obviously on Purim, you're allowed, it's a mitzvah to drink wine, but a lot of Rabbanim have come out against it just because kids today take it to an extent where they don't act properly. And if you take anything that does something that makes you act inappropriately, I don't think there's room in halacha to be able to have that. But will there be a time that you could eat a kosher brownie that has cannabis in it, just like you could eat a brownie with alcohol in it, and you get a little buzz on Shabbos? Would that be okay? I don't know. I think we're far away from that, but it is going to be an interesting and hot topic, continuing to watch. Where is Cannatech taking place?
So Cannatech is in Tel Aviv at a venue called Kultura. It's 500 people will attend. Over 200 already have subscribed, have purchased tickets. Tickets will be available. They're $200. We are specifically pricing it at that range in order to remove the elements of society that might want to come to a cannabis convention, say like a cannabis cup in the US. It is not a cannabis cup. It is a medical investor summit to talk about the legitimacy in the market for cannabis, the potential in the market, and the potential to save lives and help people with this amazing product.
Will there be entrepreneurial or I should say investor opportunities at the
Yes,
conference?
we will have a pitch event. We're accepting pitches now. If any of you out there know of businesses that are looking to raise capital inside the cannabis space, we are having a pitch event, and that will be the culmination of the event of Cannatech. Together with that, we have a lot of opportunities to network with high wealth individuals and VCs. We're there to connect the communities.
So if you're an investor, you're looking to invest in cannabis, then you would be the guy to reach out to as well.
Absolutely.
Help guide people in the opportunities. I know that from a advocate standpoint, you're very influential here in Israel and continue to help fight for medical cannabis use. These things are changing before our eyes. It is going faster than we could possibly imagine. So we could continue talking probably for hours on this, but I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for, I think it's a very interesting topic. I think, you're definitely in the right place at the right time. And as a pharmacist, you definitely know what you're talking about, especially, being involved in this for so long. I want to wish you a lot of continued hatzlacha. And, I thank you for your friendship. And I thank you for agreeing to be on the show. And I look forward to hearing some great things.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the From Entrepreneur Podcast with Nahum Kligman. We hope you learned something valuable and will share this with your friends. For show notes, archives of previous episodes, and more information to help you start and grow your business, please visit our website, www.FromEntrepreneur.com. Listen, learn, be Matzliach.